Yeah. Okay, Mbak Nisa, can we start the webinar, Mbak Nisa? Because it's
Sorry,
already
Lutfi.
1:30.
Mr. Ale still not join.
Oh, okay.
Still waiting, Mr. Ale.
Okay, maybe we will wait like maybe 5 minutes, okay? Until 35, yeah? Okay.
Oke.
Okay, for the all participants, before we begin, we would like to share a few important announcements with all participants. As this is an international webinar and the entirety of the session will be conducted in English. So hopefully all of you can join for this webinar. Yeah. Okay, first, please be informed that this webinar will be recorded and the recording may be used for documentation and publication purpose across Xiaomi CSEP's official social media and other communication channels. And by remaining in this session, it means you acknowledge and consent to the recording and potential use of the session for these purposes. And then the second one, participants are very welcome to submit your question during the Q&A session in this webinar through the chat or Q&A feature. And then you may also type your question in Bahasa Indonesia if you wish, and then we will help to deliver your question to the speakers in English. And then when submitting your question, you are very welcome to include your name, an institution or organization, maybe if you would like these details to be mentioned when your question is addressed. And then finally, participants are kindly reminded to complete the evaluation form after the session. So the evaluation form is required for participants who wish to receive a certificate of participation. And the links will be provided at the end of the webinar. So make sure you join from the beginning until the end, yeah. And thank you very much for your attention. And then we will begin shortly. We're still waiting for the speakers. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, and warm greetings to everyone. Yeah, distinguished speakers, college partners, educators, practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and all participants joining us from across Southeast Asia and beyond. Welcome to this webinar series. It is a great pleasure to have all of you with us today as part of the Xiaomio CSEP 9th Anniversary webinar series. Within the theme is the future of early childhood in Southeast Asia. On behalf of Xiaomio CSEP, I would like to warmly welcome and thank to our distinguished speakers and all participants for taking the time to join us today. My name is Muhammad Lutfi Asidiki from the Advocacy and Partnership team at Xiaomio CSEP, and it is my pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies and moderator for today's session. But before we continue, I would like to also warmly welcome to our distinguished speakers joining us today. Yeah, okay, I think the speakers already joined with us. And then the first one, we have Mr. Alejandro Sinan Ibanez. Yeah, is it correct or not, the spelling? Uh,
That is correct.
that is correct. Okay, thank you. It is a pleasure for us to have you here. And then how are you, sir?
Really, congratulations to CISEP and also to Dr. Vina for this proud work and collaboration on ECCE.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Alejandro, for joining us today. And then the second speaker, we have our very own, yeah, Professor Vina Adriani, PhD. Hello, Prof.
Hello, Gus Lutfi. Hello, Mr. Alejandro. Thank you for joining us. It's great to be here, yeah, to talk about ECCE. Thank
Okay, thank you again, Prof, for joining us today. And then all the participants, we are truly pleased to have both of you, the speakers, with us today, and we look forward for to learning from your perspective and then insights throughout this session. And then everyone, again, please join me in giving a warm round of applause to Mr. Alejandro and Professor Vina with your virtual applause. Okay. Okay, before we begin, we would like to invite everyone to join us for a group photo. For those who are able to do so, please kindly turn on your cameras and get ready for the photo. Okay, maybe for the IT team, yeah, Vanessa and friends can help us to capture this moment, yeah. And then please give us a sign, yeah, 1, 2, 3, so we can make sure our smile is being captured. Okay, maybe the formal one first. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, maybe with the C sign, yeah. Xiaomi C sign. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Again, one more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think enough for that. Thank you very much, everyone. And then hopefully you can still join for this webinar series until the end. So, okay, ladies and gentlemen, now let us begin for our discussion. And then, yeah, I think I will start this webinar series with the question, yeah. When we talk about the future of early childhood, what are we really talking about actually? Are we talking about the future of education, the future of our children, or the future of our societies? And maybe perhaps the answer is all of this. And the early years of life are not simply like the beginning of a child's educational journey. They are the foundation upon which future learning, well-being, relationship, and opportunities are built, right? And then, and as our region continues to change with new social realities, evolving technologies, demographic shifts, maybe environmental challenges, and growing inequalities, we are faced with an important question. Are our early childhood system ready for the future? And then more importantly, what kind of future do we want to create for young children across Southeast Asia? And what must we do today to make that future possible? And to help us explore these important questions, we are very pleased to have two distinguished speakers with us today, bringing complementary perspective on the future of early childhood in Southeast Asia. So the first one, please welcome Mr. Alejandro Sainan Ibanez. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Bangkok. And once again, thank you very much for this kind invitation. It is my honor to share this afternoon some of my thoughts and perspectives around future of early childhood in Southeast Asia. And I will echo some of the
Okay.
questions posed by our speaker, by our host this afternoon. And so may I
Okay.
ask if I can continue or I'll take a pause here.
Okay, I think it's better for us to know a little bit about you, sir. Okay,
Thank you
before
so
I
much.
give the floor, let me give a brief introduction about you to all the participants. Okay. Okay, for those who may not be familiar with Mr. Alejandro Sainan Ibanez is the CPLM Program Manager and a Policy and Program Specialist at the CPLM Regional Secretariat and the Siamio Secretariat. He leads the Southeast Asia Primarily Learning Matrix, the region's first large-scale learning assessment and capacity building program aimed at monitoring and improving student learning outcomes across Southeast Asia. His work focuses on leveraging system assessment to strengthen basic education through evidence-informed policies and data-driven practices. Through CPLM, he collaborates closely with ministers of education to enhance national capacities in translating assessment evidence into policy and practice at both system and school levels, while promoting cross-border knowledge sharing, peer learning, and regional dialogue in improving foundational learning systems. With more than a decade of experience in educational research and assessment in Southeast Asia and the Philippines as well, Mr. Ibanez contributes to the advancement of educational measurement and evaluation by serving as the Vice President of the Philippines Educational Measurement and Evaluation Association, the country's leading professional organization for assessment practitioners and education researchers. And then Mr. Ibanez also completing his PhD in Governance and Development, majoring in Public Policy at the National Institute of Development Administration in Bangkok, Thailand. And he earned both his master and bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of the Philippines. And his scholarly work has been published in academic journals, including the Philippine Sociological Review and the Educational Measurement and Evaluation Review. So by that, welcome, Mr. Alejandro. You have maybe 20 to 30 minutes to present your presentation, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So once again, good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of our director, Datuk Dr. Habiba Abdul Rahim, I would like to really congratulate CBCSF for 9 years of leadership in advancing early childhood care and education across Southeast Asia. So I'll go straight to it. Today, I'd like to really invite you and add to the questions posed by our host just a while ago around early childhood education. For many years, our discussions focused on one question: how do we get more children into preschool? So today, I believe we need to ask a different question. Once children are now in preschool, are we giving them the learning experiences they need to succeed throughout life? So I'd like to share my insights about the future of early childhood education and share evidence from the newly launched CPLM 2024 main regional report, together with other regional and global evidence to explore three questions. Where are we today? What have we learned? And where do we go next? So let me begin by showing you a glimpse of the global picture of what the global evidence says. UNESCO and UNICEF report in 2024 claim that we are not on track to meet SDG target 4.2, which ensures that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education. Education, it seems, starting with early childhood education, is facing twin crises of equity and relevance. Despite decades of progress, millions of children continue to enter primary school without access to quality early childhood education. At the same time, we're also witnessing a global learning crisis. UNESCO estimates that by 2030, more than 300 million children may still fail to achieve minimum proficiency in reading. And this tells us something profound, that the learning crisis does not begin in primary school. It begins much earlier, in the early years of life. At the global level, we're seeing unfortunate statistics. 1 in 4 children is not in school in the year before they are expected to start primary education. Compared with many parts of the world, however, Southeast Asia in general has made encouraging progress. Participation in organized learning before primary school is generally higher than the global average, and this reflects decades of investment by ASEAN member states. Governments across the region have invested significantly in expanding pre-primary education, and these achievements deserve recognition. However, this particular data does not tell the complete story. Averages can hide important differences within the region and variances within countries. What is clear then is that next phase of understanding must therefore focus on ensuring that every child, not just most children, has access to quality early learning. And this is where CPLM becomes particularly valuable. CPLM, or the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metrics, is a regional large-scale student learning assessment and capacity building program designed by and for Southeast Asia. While its focus is on measuring learning outcomes in grade 5, it also provides rich information about children's early learning experiences. It allows us to ask an important question: how do experiences before primary school shape learning several years later? The evidence provides some compelling answers. The first message is encouraging. Across almost every participating country, a larger proportion of grade 5 students in 2024 had attended preschool compared to the 2019 cohort. This tells us that countries are successfully expanding opportunities. More children are beginning their educational journey with some exposure to organized learning. This is a significant achievement and reflects sustained government commitment throughout the region. But we know that expansion alone does not tell the whole story. Although regional participation has improved considerably, important gaps remain. Some countries are approaching universal participation, while others continue to struggle with reaching many young children. Access also differs according to age. Younger children are still less likely to benefit from early childhood programs. So while we should celebrate progress, we should also recognize that universal access remains an unfinished project. Looking more closely, we see substantial variation across countries. On average, as you can see in the CPLM 2024 data, 56% of children attended ECE for 2 years or more. Malaysia and Vietnam led with roughly 80% at this duration, while other countries like Cambodia and Myanmar remained below 20%. CPLM 2024 reveals some education systems have succeeded in reaching almost every child. Others still have considerable work ahead, and these differences reminds us that efforts in reaching policy choices matter. Perhaps one of the strongest findings concerns socioeconomic inequality. Children from wealthier households remain significantly more likely to attend early childhood programs. These SES gaps were largest, for example, in the case of Cambodia and Myanmar, where ECE attendance is lowest overall. This insight is important because, unfortunately, those who would benefit most from high-quality early learning are often the least likely to receive it. Unless these inequalities are addressed early, they become increasingly difficult and expensive to overcome later. Similar disparities exist between urban and rural communities. Children in rural areas were less likely to have attended ECE in countries with lower overall enrollment. Geography definitely should never determine a child's future. Yet, for many children across our region, it still does. Interestingly, CPLM also highlights the important role of families. In countries such as Cambodia and Lao PDR, parental aspirations can partially offset socioeconomic disadvantage. Parents who strongly value education are more likely to enroll their children in early learning programs. This reminds us that encouraging parents to ensure that they support their child's learning starting from the early levels is critical to ensure that continued attendance and participation of children in early learning. Another important finding concerns duration. Spending more years in preschool generally leads to better learning outcomes. However, when socioeconomic status is held constant, the relationship between ECE duration and grade 5 outcomes becomes weaker or non-significant in most countries, except, for example, in the case of Cambodia, where longer ECE attendance remained associated with higher scores across all domains, and Malaysia, where mathematics scores benefited. So this pattern suggests that much of the raw association between ECE and achievement reflects underlying family advantages rather than ECE attendance alone, or that variations in ECE quality and intensity dilute measurable effects. This suggests that simply increasing the number of years is not enough. The quality of children's learning experiences ultimately determines whether those years translate into stronger learning outcomes. But clearly, despite the attenuation when SES is controlled, children who attended ECE generally outperform those who did not, even by the end of primary school. The score gains ranges from as low as 2 points in one country to as high as 12 score points in another country, which is almost equivalent to an improvement of 1 full proficiency level, which puts children in 1 or 2 years advantage in learning. So the advantages are particularly strong when preschool is combined with supportive home learning environments. What happens before primary school continues to influence learning many years later. Early childhood education, therefore, is not simply about childcare. It is also about building strongest foundations for lifelong learning. So, question is, why do we focus on quality ECE then? Because CPLM death data and evidence remind us that far too many children continue to struggle to achieve foundational skills despite attending full 5 years of schooling. CPLM 2024 reveals that across participating countries, approximately 15% of grade 5 students are still performing at grade 2 reading levels, virtually no significant change since 2019. Nearly 1 in 10 face similar challenges in mathematics, with slight reduction since 2019. These learning gaps did not suddenly appear in grade 5. These gaps were accumulated over many years. This is precisely why investment during the early years is so important. Taken together, the evidence tells a clear story. Access is expanding, early learning works, but children from disadvantaged backgrounds continue to start school behind. Home learning environments matter, quality matters, equity matters. The next frontier is no longer simply expanding preschool. It is ensuring that every child experiences high quality early learning. So in response to these evidence, the ASEAN region is already taking action. Across ASEAN, early childhood education has become an increasingly important policy priority. Countries recognize that stronger education systems begin with stronger early childhood systems. The good news is that the momentum on ECCE is growing. Our regional commitments are increasingly being translated into concrete regional action. So the significant milestone started, for example, in September of 2023, when ASEAN leaders adopted the ASEAN Leaders Declaration on Early Childhood Care and Education during the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta, led by Indonesia. This was significant because it elevated ECCE beyond being just an education issue. It became a regional development priority, recognizing that investing in young children is fundamental to achieving inclusive growth, social equity, and broader sustainable development. Building on the Leaders' Declaration, the ASEAN and CMEO worked together through CMEO-CESEP to develop the joint roadmap on early childhood care and education. And I'm sure Dr. Vina later on will expound more about this. And this roadmap translates political commitment into practical priorities for countries. It provides a shared framework for collaboration, helping member states learn from one another while recognizing that each country's context is unique. Most recently, these priorities have been reflected in the recently launched ASEAN Education Work Plan 2026 to 2030. So this is particularly important, these regional actions, because it now means that ECCE is no longer a standalone initiative. It is becoming part of the ASEAN's broader regional education agenda. Now that ASEAN has established a shared regional and vision and regional commitment, the next question is, how do we now translate these commitments into meaningful action at the country level? So drawing in from this particular roadmap, I would like to show you here a framework that gives us a sense of reference point, focusing on continuous improvement cycle rather than one-time intervention. It begins with understanding the current situation, that every country starts from a different context with different strengths, challenges, and priorities. The first step of this framework is to understand through a situation analysis, establishing a baseline, and from there, countries develop evidence-informed policies and move towards implementation. But implementation is not the end of the process, as we know. Even well-designed policies need to be monitored, evaluated, and refined over time. Continuous monitoring allows countries to learn what is working, identify challenges early, and make necessary adjustments. Importantly, this process is supported by several regional mechanisms. Across the top of this framework, you would see that there are 4 areas where regional cooperation can make a difference. And at the same time, 2 enabling factors strengthen the entire process. The first is capacity building, because strong policies require capable institutions and well-prepared policymakers. And the second one is monitoring and evaluation, which ensures that decisions continue to be guided by evidence rather than assumptions. So ultimately, the goal is not simply to produce better policies on ECCE. The goal is really just to create better outcomes for children and over time realize our shared regional vision of ensuring that every child has access to quality early childhood care and education. So what is the bottom line, essentially? Investing early is the smartest investment we can make, not simply because it is good for children, although certainly is, but because it is also good for societies, it is good for economies, and it is good for the future of our region. So to conclude, I'd like to leave you with 3 simple priorities for the future of ECCE in Southeast Asia. First, make quality the new priority. Expanding access remains important, definitely, but our focus must now shift to ensuring that every child receives high quality early learning that truly prepares them for school and life. Second, reach every child, especially the most disadvantaged. The evidence is clear that children from poorer households and rural communities are still less likely to benefit from ECCE. Equity must be at the heart of our efforts. And third, build strong systems at last. Sustainable progress requires well-trained teachers, effective governance, adequate financing, and strong partnerships across education, health, nutrition, and social protection. If we can achieve these 3 priorities, quality, equity, and strong systems, we will give every child in Southeast Asia a stronger start and a brighter future. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Alejandro, for your great presentation and for a very insightful presentation. Make a quality the new priority, reach every child, especially the most disadvantaged, and build strong system that lasts. I think this is very, visionary things that we need to conduct for this era, yeah. And then what I find particularly important, sir, maybe from your presentation, is that this is reminding us that preparing for the future requires us to seems like understand where we are today. Like strong data and evidence can actually help us see the gaps and understand the challenges and make a better decision for students in the future, maybe, yeah. And okay, then thank you again for Mr. Alejandro for your presentation. And then for all participants are very welcome to submit your question during the Q&A session again. And then you can also type your question now, and then you may also type your question in Bahasa Indonesia if you want, and we will help you to deliver your question to the speakers. And okay, and then from the importance of evidence and regional perspectives, let us now turn to another important dimension of shaping the future of early childhood, like the system, policies, and practices that support children, families, and maybe for the border, the communities. This is our second speaker, is someone who needs no introduction to the Samuel Joseph community. Welcome, Professor Vina Adriani, PhD. Hello, Prof.
Hello, Gus Lutfi. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Alejandro, for a very insightful presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So I think I will give some information about you. Yeah, okay. This is, we have Professor Vina Adriani, PhD, Director of Samuel CSEP, Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, Regional Center for Early Childhood Care, Education and Parenting. She is also a professor in the Department of Early Childhood Education at the Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia and has extensive experience as an academic, researcher, and leader in the field of early childhood education. At the regional and global levels, Professor Vina has played an active role in shaping early childhood policy and dialogue. She has been involved in the development of key regional and international policy documents, including the ASEAN Declaration on Early Childhood Care and Education, the Tashkent Declaration on ECCE, and the T20 policy briefs on early childhood development, education, and care, and so on. And she has also served as an advisor to the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Matrix, or CPLM, and has been invited as a keynote and feature speaker at universities and international forums across Asia, Europe, and beyond, including the University College London, the University of Hong Kong, the University of Tsukuba, Gothenburg University, and the World Conference on Early Childhood Care and Education. And as a scholar, her scholarship focused on gender and social justice in early childhood education, the construction of children and childhood in marginal communities, and the impact of neoliberalism on ECE. And her research primarily draws on feminist post-structuralism and post-colonialism. And she has published numerous peer-reviewed articles on these issues. And one of her publications, maybe if I have to mention, is the book with the title of Gender and Power in Early Childhood Education in Indonesia, published by Routledge. And through her leadership at Samuel CSET, she continues to bring together research, policy, practice, and regional collaboration to advance early childhood care and education across Southeast Asia. So please give round of applause, Professor Vina Adriani. You have 20 to 30 minutes to present your presentation, and the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Gus Lutfi, for a very generous introduction. Yeah, so it is truly an honor for me to share the stage with Sir Alejandro, who has been working rigorously in the improvement of literacy and numeracy in Southeast Asia region. And I also would like to express my highest gratitude to all the participants who have spent their times to join today's discussion. So for your kind information, today's webinar will be the final webinar, part of our webinar series commemorating Semiosis CEP's 9th anniversary. So allow me to share my screen. Hold on, please. Okay. Yeah. So I would like to, I think I'm going to talk today, and I hope it is the continuation of the conversation that has been started by Sir Alejandro. So the topics that I'm going to talk about the future of early childhood care education in Southeast Asia. So I will predominantly drawing from the ASEAN Semio Joint Roadmap on early childhood care education, but I will be adding some critical perspective in order to really unpack the importance of this roadmap. And I really like, and also to some extent resonate with what the moderator mentioned earlier. When we talk about the future of ECCE, I think there are two questions that perhaps we need to ask, as mentioned by moderator earlier. The first one will be, to what extent ECCE can prepare the future, and also perhaps the second question is that what kind of future we would like to reimagine. And I think again, very often when we talk about ECCE, we always see ECCE, we always encourage ECCE to become a space that prepare young children so that they can be ready for the future. But I think if we look at the second question that I posed earlier, I think it is also equally important to ensure that ECCE is not only preparing young children to adapt for the future, but also ECCE should also prepare the children so that they can recreate different kind of future. At the moment, we are living in a quite pessimistic time with the whole geopolitics, the climate crisis that happens in front of us, and also a lot of polarization, inequalities that continue to be increasing. So I think it is important for us to allow some space so that ECCE can become a space for us to reimagine what kind of future we want to. So in another word, that instead of encouraging young children to be ready for the future, perhaps we can also reimagine to what extent ECCE can create a different and a better future. Yeah. So I think again, when we talk about the future, I think, very often we talk about the future as something that will be happening after the present. Yeah. I think, we understand the future in terms of the timeline. We have the past time, we have the present time, and also we have the future. But I think what kind of future that we would like to have, it's a political choice. So again, if I think I keep on, going back to the earlier statement when I mentioned that, very often we ECCE very often in our mind we are seeing ECCE as a space to prepare young children for the future. But again, I think sometimes we don't have time to discuss what kind of future that we would like to have. So I think what kind of future we would like to have, it's a very much political choice in the sense that, we have the capacity to redesign, to reconstruct different ways of future, a future that hopefully better than our future. So when we are saying that ECCE should become a space to prepare the future, in my understanding, it seems like we are very much passive in nature, like we are submitting to what happen in the future. But I think perhaps when we shift our paradigm by thinking that it is through ECCE that we can reimagine different and better future, I think it becomes more optimistic and also more active in nature. Yeah. So I think again, as I've mentioned before, so ECCE should become a place where societies can decide what kind of future becomes possible. In other words, we are reimagining a better future, a brighter future that we are having nowadays. So I think, but again, we need to be questioned some critical perspective. We need to question, when we are thinking about the future, who's going to be benefiting from in the future, who's going to be continue to be excluded. I think in Sir Alejandro's presentation, Sir Alejandro mentions about how the inequality continue to be very pervasive in the region. We see the inequalities in terms of the literacy and numeracy, but literacy and numeracy is not a standalone factor. It was also caused by deeper layers of inequality. So I think we also need to question who's going to be continue excluded in the future and what must change structurally. If we would like to have a better, a more equal, a more equity future, I think then we need to also question what kind of change that we must do on a structural level. So again, I don't come up with specific data. I think Sir Alejandro has really elaborated and also pointed out some of the very important data that show, the inequalities in Southeast Asia region. But I think when we talk about Southeast Asia, we all agree that this region is marked by so many layers of contradiction. Southeast Asia, I think, now considered to be the new economic wave. Yeah, I think when the whole world at the moment seems to be collapsing economically, I think Southeast Asia can still stand tall. So in a way, it is also an achievement. But we are also seeing, a lot of greater inequality, greater division in the region. So it is really a region that is, signified by different layers of contradiction. And when it comes to early childhood care education, we also see a number of progress. I think we have to admit that for the past 10 years, there has been more policy attention that shows the regional commitment to the greater acknowledgement of the roles of the early years. Sir Alejandro has mentioned before that, for the past 4 years, we have launched 2 important documents. The first one is ASEAN Declaration on Early Childhood Care Education, and then the second one is the ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap on Early Childhood Care Education. And Simeo CSEP is very privileged, is very humble to become part of the initiative where we are providing high-level assistance to the Indonesia Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, and we are working closely with ASEAN Secretariat as well as Simeo Secretariat. So there is no doubt that in terms of the policy attention, we see a stronger regional commitment that also indicate a greater recognition for the early years setting. But at the same time, I think we also still observe some challenge. I think in terms of the access, the gross enrollment rates when it comes to at least 1 year pre-primary education and early childhood care education, we are still seeing that, only several countries that have achieved almost 100% of gross enrollment rates for at least 1 year pre-primary education. Other countries, they are still struggling. And it is something that we need to be worried, because at the same time, we are almost all countries in the region are also committed to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030. And as mentioned by Sir Alejandro, one of the indicators or one of the goals for sustainable development goals is related with, expanding access for boys and girls to at least 1 year pre-primary education, so that it is expected by 2030, all children in the region, whether it is boys or girls, regardless of their socioeconomic background, ethnicity, can have access to high quality early childhood education. But we still see how the existing system continue to produce and reproduce unequal childhood. So not all children have equal access to early childhood education. And we also need to talk beyond access, because even if children have access to early childhood education, we also need to question whether the quality is similar, whether the quality is also equal. Very often there exists unequal services, unequal qualities when it comes to early childhood education profession. And also we also see a number of pressure, that also affects the region. I'll be talking about this in more details later on when we talk about, the condition of the workforce, the teachers in early childhood care education setting. Climate disruption is also happening all around the globe. A digital divide, despite the fact that the region is also showing a greater commitment for the to digitize education, to use more technology in education. But we also continue to see how the digital divides exist in our region. Access to internet, access to connectivity is not equal in the region. So, and that is something that we also need to talk about. And also we are seeing the fragmented governance. Obviously, when we talk about early childhood care education, we are not only focusing on education, but we are also observing other sectors such as health, nutrition, and then protection, well-being, and also parenting. And we see that all these sectors very often are still very much fragmented. They tend to work in a silo. They don't work in a collaborative manners. And this is also something that we need to be, to have a concern. Yeah. So I would invite in today's discussion, I would invite all of you to perhaps use critical lens, so that this critical lens for me is very important, because this critical lens will allow us particular question, because I think, I remember one of my teacher used to say that, a smart student is not those who can answer the question, but rather those who can ask critical question. And I think if you look at AI, AI is becoming stronger and stronger, smarter and smarter, not because of the answer, but because of the question, the prompt that we are feeding to the AI. So I think asking important question for me, it's very important, because by asking a critical question, then perhaps we can reimagine different future that we would like to have. So I think at the moment when we are talking about early childhood care education, the dominant paradigms very often is rooted on economic discourse. And I'm not against economic discourse. I think, on a pragmatic level, it is very obvious early childhood care education can indeed prepare future workforce. But I think we also need to use another perspective, which is a right-based perspective, because by seeing early childhood care education using a right-based perspective, we will see children as right holders, not future workers, meaning children at the moment, their being also has particular rights that needs to be fulfilled at the moment. So this will allow us to see children instead of future workers, but also as current citizen. And as a current citizen, as a current individual, they have particular rights that needs to be fulfilled. And when we talk about United Nations Convention of Children's Rights, I think it is also very obvious that having access to high quality education, including early childhood education, is one of the fundamental rights of young children. And also, we also need to use what I call the feminist ethics of care. We all know that one of the foundation of early childhood care education is in the notion of care. Care is not on a peripheral. Care is not marginal in the, marginalized in early childhood education setting. Care is actually the heart of early childhood care education. Early childhood care education is nothing without this notion of care. So care, is actually the heart of early childhood care education. And it is one of the things that differentiate early childhood care education with another levels of education. And we also need to recognize in order to produce the roadmap of care economics, because I think we need to recognize that care work is also significant for the country's economic development. And I also would like to invite us to also use a decolonial perspective, meaning this perspective will allow us to appreciate, to respect the local knowledge, language, and culture. Because I think when we talk about early childhood education, and I will be talking about this a little bit later, we often think that, there is one size fits all model, that, if there is a curriculum that works in Finland, that it will also work in Southeast Asia. But what I would like to us to think is that sometimes we need to go beyond this one size fits model. We need to use the more contextualized, the more historical, the more place-based approach in order to ensure that local knowledge, local practices, local language, and also local culture is appreciated and integrated in early childhood care education. And I think, again, now the discussion about, climate justice is becoming more and more important. Many people are still skeptical to what extent early childhood care education is related with climate crisis. But if you look at the data, it is very evident that when it comes to climate crisis, when it comes to climate changes, it affects children mostly. So children very often become the victim of this whole climate changes. So I think we also need to talk about ecological justice, because children cannot be separate. Children and also their childhood cannot be separated from climate and place. And we also need to talk about political economy, about the financing, and also the governance aspect. And I'm very pleased to learn that in the region level, and also there has been some work that trying to advocate, especially the Ministry of Finance, in order to play more roles in early childhood education. Simeo-CSEP has been in a conversation with ARNEC, for example, and they're going to initiate the discussion, a very important high level ministerial meeting next year in order to discuss about the issue financing of early childhood care education. And as Sir Alejandro mentioned before, I would like to draw my speech, my presentation today from the roadmap that the region has already have. So this roadmap was launched in the beginning of this year. We call the roadmap the ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap on Early Childhood Care Education in Southeast Asia. This has been the result of a very long work. Yeah, we started this work since 2022, starting from organizing the ministerial meeting, Southeast Asian Policy Dialogue, that resulted in this ASEAN Declaration on Early Childhood Care Education. The declaration was later adopted and ratified by the country's leader. And then from that, we are translating that declaration into a more practical document, which is this roadmap. So again, Simeo-CSEP was very pleased, was very privileged to be part of this initiative. We are by working closely with the Indonesian Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, as well as ASEAN Secretariat and Simeo Secretariat. So I will be drawing of the key areas in this roadmap, and perhaps what kind of question that we need to ask in each of the key areas. So again, the ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap, as I've mentioned before, it is just more than a document. It shows regional commitment into a shared architecture for action. And there are several principles that guide this roadmap. First, it recognizes the local context. So this roadmap needs to be contextualized. We understand countries in Southeast Asian region are very, very diverse. So again, we cannot use one size fits all model. There is always a need to contextual the content of this roadmap. It is also flexible, meaning perhaps there are some shared issues, there are some shared problems, but there are also some differences. And so the approach to how this roadmap being implemented is very flexible from one country to another country. But Sir Alejandro is coming from the he's an expert in the learning assessment. So I think measurement is also becoming very important to understand to what extent this roadmap has been very successful. And also it has to be collaborative, because again, we cannot work in silo. We need to work in collaborative manner to ensure that the content of this roadmap can be implemented. So when we talk about this ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap, it has 7 key areas. The first area is in access, yeah. And then the second, I will be talking about them in a more detail later. So there are 7 areas. The first one is access. The second one regarding quality. The third one regarding teachers or workforce. The fourth one regarding governance. And then the fifth one regarding parents and caregivers. The sixth one regarding the digitalization of education. And the final one regarding the resources or the financing aspect. So let us look at the key area one by one. So again, as I mentioned before, the key area number 1 is related with the notion of access. But again, if we are using some critical question, then we will be asking perhaps not only, what is the percentage of children who can enroll early childhood education, what is the, the gross enrollment rate in the country. Those are important questions. In my opinion, we also need to move beyond the enrollment to the notion of justice. So when we look at this key area number 1 and we are adopting a critical perspective, then we will be asking questions such as which children remain invisible. Because again, when we talk about Southeast Asia, I think very often we always assume Southeast Asia is a homogeneous region. It's not. It is very diverse. It is very heterogeneous. In fact, in one country, for example, like in Indonesia, we have more than 1,700 ethnicities. Each ethnicities have their own languages. So it's a very diverse country. And I think the same thing with Philippines, with many countries as well, with Cambodia, for example. Cambodia also have different language in terms of the mother tongue. So I think we need to question which children remain invisible. So the invisibility can be due to the children's ethnic background. I think again, Southeast Asia is a home for indigenous people, but the number of indigenous children who have access to high quality early childhood education remains an issue. And also if you talk about different layers, for example, disabled children, again, very often inclusive education is not a mainstream in early childhood care education across the region. So again, we also need to question to what extent early childhood education has been responsive to the need of the children with disability. And also when you look at about gender, I think the finding of CPLM, even though we need to carefully interpret the data, but again, it signifies that there exist gender differences when it comes to, to participate in early childhood education. So again, I think we also need to, when we talk about access should not be understood only as an enrollment, but access should be understood as full participation, meaningful inclusion. In another word, access is not only a seat in the center, it is also children's right to be belong, to feel that they are, part of the center that they are in. They can fully participate and they can also be fully recognized. So visibility is very important. And I think we need to approach in that direction, not only as a form of enrollment in terms of the percentage or numbers, but more importantly, we need to see access as, meaningful inclusion that goes beyond the notion of enrollment to the notion of justice. And then if you look at the key area number 2, so key area number 2 talk about quality. And very often when we talk about quality, we are borrowing from the global standard. And I'm not against the global standard. But again, as I've mentioned before, we need to contextualize the standard in ways that it becomes responsive with the context of Southeast Asia region. And also very often when we talk about high quality early childhood education, we always talk in terms of infrastructure, good building, for example, teacher-children's ratio. Those are important. But we also need to understand that quality, is not a template. It is something that should be negotiated with children, families, teacher communities, and also evidence. And there are also several aspects, that perhaps can also be proposed as another dimension of quality. So again, very often when we talk about quality, we talk about teacher ratio, we talk about teacher educational background, we talk about the infrastructure, the building, the facilities, the educational toys, the books that the center have. Again, those are important, but we also need to ask other things. We also need to see other things. So, again, quality is very messy concept. It's a very complex concept, a lot of nuance in it, but perhaps if we can, simplify the discussion, when we talk about the quality, we can also see in at least, four things. The first one will be to what extent the curriculum in the center in early childhood care education is play-based. We understand that children learn through relation, through movement, through curiosity, and also through imagination. And it's going back again to why the notion of care is very important in early childhood care education setting. And also curriculum in early childhood care education, it has to be place-based. We talked earlier about the needs to, to appreciate, to respect local knowledge, local language, local culture. And this is exactly why we need place-based pedagogy, because curriculum begins with local ecology, local language, local culture. We all know that, in early childhood care education, it is important for children to experience meaningful learning, and learning can only be meaningful when it is contextualized, when it is connected with the children's experience. And the curriculum also needs to be right-based. We need to appreciate children's voices, despite the fact that all countries in Southeast Asian region, they are all adopting the United Nations Convention of Children's Rights. But our approach to children's rights very often using this protectionist paradigm. But I think there is also a need to use the participation paradigm in order to ensure that children's voices, children's safety, agency, dignity, and participation are guarded throughout the process. And because again, the region is very diverse, it's very heterogeneous. Curriculum in early childhood care education also needs to promote the anti-bias curriculum. So we need to ensure that gender, class, disability, and ethnic stereotype are actively questioned, and also actively discussed, and also actively visible in the early childhood care education curriculum. And if you look at the key area number three talk about the ECC workforce or teacher. So we all agree that teachers, they are the center of transformation. But very often when we see early childhood care education teacher or teachers in general, we are very often, we position them as lacking skill. And I think, we need, and it's very often it is rooted on the deficit model of seeing the teachers. And I think we need to move beyond this deficit model. We need to adopt more capacity and dignity models by, instead of blaming the teacher, instead of, asking the teacher what do they know and what do they do, what they don't know. Perhaps we also need to question what kind of system that makes their work continue to be invisible, continue to be precarious, and also continue to be underpaid. So we need to develop a system of professional learning that can, appreciate their capacities, their capacities, and also their dignity. We also need to ensure that gender responsive competencies are introduced. At the moment, most of the teachers in early childhood care education are female, and it is also the result of feminization of early childhood care education that continue to see early childhood care education as an extension of motherhood. As the result, we see the number of males participating as a teachers in early childhood care education is very limited. And also we need to ensure that there is a professional development models for the teachers, whether it is for the in-service teachers and also for the pre-service teacher. And we also recognize their teacher agency in making curriculum or in creating the assessment. So the curriculum and the assessment is not a top-down approach, but rather a bottom-up approach that really utilize the teacher's experiences. And also the key area number 4 talk about the governance. So at the moment, countries in Southeast Asia, the governance of early childhood care education is the result of this, intertwine or the entanglement between the government's funding and then the funding from the donors, the funding from the private sectors, the community participation. But there is a need to ensure that this governance model move beyond the projectization. Very often, especially the international donor organization, they come to a country with particular project, and once the project is concluded, so the sustainability is being questioned because it is a project based. So I think there is a need to ensure that the governance move beyond the projectization. And also we need to understand that when the system is fragmented, it will also reduce a fragmented childhood. And if we all agree that one of the objectives of early childhood care education is to, to have this holistic and integrated childhood, then we need to ensure the system is also integrated. So early childhood care education will require coordination, whether it is across education, health, nutrition, protection, social welfare, and also in terms of the governance between the central government and the local government. And countries in Southeast Asia, they don't start from scratch. Countries in Philippines, for example, they have a good model of this integrated system. Indonesia is also having the law that, emphasize the needs to have this holistic and integrated approach. But perhaps what we need to ensure is that the implementation can also be aligned with the objective. So we need to make sure that, because the system is shared, the system is coordinated, then the accountability also needs to be shared, not fragmented. And then another key areas discussed in the roadmap is regarding parenting. At the moment, when we talk about parenting, very often it is associated as a mother duties. So mother continue to be seen as the primary responsible person for for parenting. And I think we must go beyond that notion that parenting should not only blame the mother. Yesterday we had a very interesting webinar talking about this parenting, and one of the speakers, Dr. Hani Yulindra Sari, talk about we need to ensure that, fathers are participating more, but not only fathers, we also need to make sure that the countries is also present. The country also needs to ensure that, all the parents who have obstacle in fulfilling their duties, their responsibility as a parents, they also need to be supported. So the level of support can be varied. We can have a social protection, decent work days, and then parental leave, childcare, accessible and also affordable childcare, and also community care. So a caring society does not only tell family their responsibilities. And then the key area number 6, it talk about the digitalization of education. And I think almost all countries in Southeast Asia, especially now with the artificial intelligence, the desire to use digital innovation is very strong. But I think we have to be very careful as well that digital innovation must begin with equity and ethics. Again, we also need to understand the limit of digital innovation. Digital innovation cannot replace the importance of caring. So I think the question is not how do we digitize early childhood care education, but I think we need to ask questions to what extent technology can support a more relational, more inclusive, more safe, and also more culturally meaningful ECCE. So we need to ensure that, there are some guidelines when it comes to implement digital innovation in early childhood care education. We need to ensure, we need to have discussion about the question of access. We also need to have a discussion about, the age appropriateness, the privacy, the teacher agency, the parent trust, and also some offline alternative. Yeah, I think I've discussed about that. And also the final area of the ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap is regarding the resource mobilization. So the resource mobilization, it's not a technical question, it's not a financial question only, but it is a justice question, because without financing, equity only becomes a rhetoric. And we see this, all countries in the region, I think since the past 20 years ago, they all agree the importance of early childhood care education. The rhetoric that early childhood care education is a form of investment, investing in early childhood care education will bring higher will bring higher return in the future is something that we often heard. But sometimes we don't really address the precondition that is needed in order to ensure, that kind of rhetoric can happen. When we talk about the financial aspect of early childhood care education, it is almost like, addressing the elephant in the room. It's very obvious, it's very important, So I think when we talk about financing early childhood education, public investment, when I talk about public investment, it means the government's roles in ensuring that there is a sufficient budget available for having a high quality early childhood education is very important. So it is the core entitlement. Obviously, we can have innovative financing, but only when it is aligned with equity. At the moment, we see the commodification of early child care education, the rising of private ECCE happening in almost all countries in the region, especially in the big city. In one hand, it's helping the government in order to expand the gross enrollment rate, but again, at the same time, very often it perpetuates inequalities between different center. Private sectors are more than welcome to participate, but I think we need to ensure that the partnership is accountable and not a substitution. And obviously, because countries in Southeast Asia, we are also relying from the donor support. I think donor support is also very much welcome, but we need to ensure that the funding from the donor can be used to strengthen the policy to avoid dependency. And it's going back again to the point I mentioned earlier, so that we can, we don't have this mindset of projectization when we have funding from the donor organization. And again, I think what we are trying to promote in the key area number 7 is that to advocate people, government especially, to realize that early childhood care education is a public good. Yeah. And also I just would like to talk a little bit about this climate resilience, because I would like to ensure that we have numbers of regional documents. So the ASEAN Simeo Joint Roadmap is only one document from many documents that we have in the region. And another document that is quite important is the Vientiane Statement, and it is specifically talking about the climate resilience in the early years. So I think again we also need to to start the conversation of the climate crisis, because as I've mentioned before, when we talk about the climate crisis, young children, they are the ones who are the most affected by the crisis. So we need to ensure that the ECCE system can protect children's bodies, children's relationship with the nature, children routine. They can also ensure that when things like displacement, heat, flood, and haze happen, it doesn't take away children's right for playing and also from learning. Yeah. So I think what perhaps we need to have, in order to have in order to anticipate the future of ECCE, as I've mentioned before, we need to go beyond the notion of access to the notion of equity. I'm very much in agreement with what Sir Alejandro mentioned before, that we need to reach those to structurally excluded, meaning we need to reach out to the most vulnerable and the most marginalized children, because when you talk about the social change can only be happening when you are starting to empower those who are in the marginalized position. And also, we also need to shift our paradigm from the notion of school readiness, seeing ECC as a preparation for primary education, to the notion of right. We need to, to opening up access for children to high quality early childhood education, not simply because we are preparing future workers, but we Indonesia, we are just celebrating Children's Day yesterday. So I think Children's Day is a reminder for us to what extent assurance to meaningful pedagogy. Again, to what extent learning is meaningful, learning is joyful, and also learning is contextualized with the children's right. Very often the discussion in early childhood education is focusing so much on individual, whether it is children, parents, teachers. And I think we need to move beyond individual resilience to the system resilience. We need to create a system and infrastructure that will really allow individual to flourish. And by that, this system will also be paying attention to this notion of care, the climate changes, and also the protection of infrastructure. And we also need to move beyond an idea that position early childhood care education as a private good, as a private responsibility, to the early childhood care education is a public goods, and because it is public goods, there is a need to have public accountability. So in another word, the future is not predetermined. It is something that we can reimagine. It is something that we can recreate, but it can only be built through policy choices, financing choices, and also everyday pedagogical choice. And just to conclude my presentation, I just would like to, to sort of like, give this short reminder that, the future of early childhood education in Southeast Asia is a promise that every child can be seen, a promise that every teacher can be valued, and also a promise that every community has a voice. So thank you very much, and I look forward for the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for your very comprehensive critical presentation, Prof. Okay, and then what I found particularly important from your presentation is that critical thinking is very important to shape or to build a better future for our children. And then I think one sentence that I need to quote from your presentation is the future is not predetermined. It is built through policy choices, financing choices, and everyday pedagogical choices. I think that's very beautiful. And then, yeah, thank you once again for both our speakers for sharing your valuable perspective with us today. And then, ladies and gentlemen, all the participants, we have heard important reflections on the future of education and early childhood in Southeast Asia, from like the importance of evidence, data, and then also the regional collaboration that just mentioned about ASEAN Joint Roadmap, ASEAN Siameo Joint Roadmap. And then now maybe we will move to our question and answer session. So we have received several questions from our participants here, and I will also raise a few questions related to the presentation maybe. Okay, because this topic is very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the first one maybe we have Rizka Maratusolihah. Okay, maybe you want to ask directly to the speakers, or I need to read your question from the chat box. Rizka Maratusolihah, you want to ask directly to the speakers? This is a great opportunity for you to ask directly to the speakers. Okay, I think I need to read the question. Okay, hello, Miss and Mr. I am a teacher of ECE, and now we are developing a pioneer maritime and safety-focused integrated learning center for early childhood within a shipbuilding polytechnic campus. From Siameo's regional perspective, how can we best align this unique maritime context with Southeast Asian early childhood standards and safety practices? Yeah, this is like about the local things, yeah, and then I think this is very important. Okay, okay, maybe from Profina or maybe Mr. Alejandro, you want to answer the question from Rizka first, maybe?
Do you want to go ahead, Miss Alejandro? Sir Alejandro, sorry.
Dr. Dina, maybe you can go ahead and then I'll jump in. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. So thank you very much, Ibu
Ibu Rizka.
Ibu Rizka, yeah, for the question, yeah. I think Ibu Rizka, I mentioned earlier about the place-based pedagogy, the importance of recognizing children's place and ensuring that the learning, the playing conducted in that particular center is responded to the place where children are situated. So very often when we talk about early childhood care education curriculum, we have this one-size-fits-all model that that, everywhere, regardless of the place, early childcare education curriculum will be similar, will be identical. And I think we need to pause here, and sometimes we need to ask whether it is the right thing to do, whether it is the right direction to do. And I think, in my opinion, and there has been a discussion at the global and also regional level, the need to have more this place-based pedagogy. So by place-based pedagogy, we can ensure that children who are probably living near the ocean, like you, for example, like the one that you mentioned, they can have a curriculum that is more responsive to their situation. Children who are living in the mountainous area, they can also have a different set of curriculum. There are some set principles that perhaps needs to be shared across different contexts, but there are also some, some contextualized curriculum that also needs to be present. Because again, when we talk about, the early childcare education has to be meaningful, and children needs to learn in a meaningful ways. The only way to make it meaningful is by ensuring that children feels connected. What happened, whatever they are learning, they are playing in the center, they feel some connection with their daily life. And I think that's very important. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Vina. And then maybe just to
Okay.
echo
Yeah.
what was mentioned by Dr. Vina around looking at best practices from the global and regional literature and evidence. Perhaps to respond to the question, and correct me if I was able or wasn't able to get the question right, but if we are an ECE teacher, for example, working in an ECE school, or a university or a college or an education institution that offers ECE program, one priority, for example, is to be able to leverage existing regional frameworks. I could go back again to the ASEAN CMU joint roadmap on ECCE, where it has some certain indicators and parameters around successful implementation of ECCE programs. So that's one key resource that many practitioners, such as Ibu, asked a while ago, around implementing to ECCE. Second criteria or second leveraging of resource could be around existing Southeast Asia or regional frameworks on competency frameworks. So I would like to jump in around bringing in the Southeast Asia competency framework for teachers. And it has a particular component around effective pedagogy that looks at the alignment between effective curriculum, effective instruction, and also effective delivery of assessments. But contextualizing that in the setting of ECCE. So as mentioned by Dr. Vina, one of the principles outlined in the roadmap is the play-based approach. And it needs to be front and center when it comes to designing modules, programs. It has to be built within the system, ensuring that it is at the heart of the practice of ECCE, not only on paper, not only on the design of the actual program, but also on the delivery and the actual implementation. So I do hope I was able to answer that question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the answer for Profina, and then also Sir. The situation in the local context is very different, right? Are you freezing now? Seems
Yes.
like freezing. Yeah.
Yeah, a bit. I think, yeah, the internet connection probably.
Um,
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, internet connection.
Maybe you can turn off the video.
Okay, how about now? Oh, okay, yeah. How about now? Is it good? Okay.
Thank you, sir and Ibu. May I ask, is the CMU
Oh, okay.
open for elaborate from this program because this is my new program in campus, like in the integrated learning center, like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm responding to your question, Mbak Rizka. So we don't really have specific program at the moment about that, but we are currently doing two main projects that perhaps to some extent is related with your project. The first one is we have a project on climate changes. We are working closely with ARNEC and also with the Indonesian National Coalition on Early Childcare Development. And also the second module that we are preparing is related with the second project, my apologies, that we are preparing is on ethno-parenting, and it's basically trying to ensure that local knowledge, local culture is being integrated in the learning process. So it's not directly related perhaps, but to some extent it has some connection. Maybe after this webinar, we can have more conversation, ya Bu ya, about the collaboration potential to see what else we can do if we would like to work together, ya Bu Rizka.
Okay, thank you so much, Ibu. I hope this collaboration will come. Thank you, Ibu.
Thank you, Mbak.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Rizka. So for the next question, we have from Dr. Haja Helwiah Makarim, MPD, lecturer at Universitas Muhammadiyah Bogor Raya. Maybe Ibu Helwiah, you want to ask directly, and then I will offer the microphone to you. I need to read the question. Ibu Helwiah, you want to ask? Yes, please. Yeah.
Huh?
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe you can read, Mas Lutfi.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. The question from Ibu Helwiah, actually she has two questions. The first one is, how can Southeast Asian countries ensure that expanding access to early childhood education also translates into measurable improvements in learning outcome and child development? And maybe the second one is about what role should regional collaboration and international organization play in supporting policies that move early childhood education from a focus on enrollment numbers to long-term impact on equity and quality. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Please,
Maybe
for Professor Vina and Mr. Alejandro.
Yeah.
Very difficult question. Thank you, Bu
Indeed.
Helwiah. Thank you. Very, very deep question.
Indeed, it is. I think it's a question that puts essentially the heart of what we're doing in Simeo entirely. But maybe I'll pick up on the question number one, which is on looking at how do we support Southeast Asian countries in expanding access beyond. I mean, looking at beyond access to ECCE, but also looking at translation to learning outcomes. That is one of the major key finding that came out in our analysis, where many of our systems in the region are increasingly pouring in investments towards ECCE over the last 10 to 5 years. That means policies and financing has geared towards improving not only the infrastructure within the different countries, but also providing the necessary support in delivering ECCE. And the data is clear that expansion has already been the phenomenon over the last 5 years in Southeast Asia. But the big question mark that we have from CMEO Secretariat and from CPLM is really about how come that these investments are not translating to actual improvement to learning outcomes. And when we saw in the analysis, when we dig into looking at disaggregation and really digging deeper into the analysis, it would show you that there are many factors to consider. As I have pointed out a while ago, equity is really emerging as one of the key issues in the translation of the learning of investment into learning outcomes. So you would see that even though many children have, for example, assuming that they have attended ECE, even in a longer time of 2 years and entering primary education, and when they about to exit primary education and when they take CPLM assessment, it clearly shows that they do not have the foundational skills. So in between, clearly from the onset, children are already disadvantaged. So we're looking at variables beyond school and beyond communities. We're looking at variables that are clearly within the structural barriers and challenges that we're experiencing, right? So children who are coming from low SES, coming from rural communities, typically a boy, right, who do not have any experience in being supported by their parents, coming from low resource settings. So these structural barriers and challenges are really impeding children's learning and learning the fundamentals or the foundations that they need in order to be successful. So there seems to be a big disconnect between the investments from ECE towards learning outcomes. So what is happening in between, right? So that particular relationship seems to be not linear. We're looking at a multifaceted problem that would require a whole of government or a whole of society approach, where we are not attacking the problem. That means the learning crisis is not only an educational issue, it's a developmental issue. It's an issue that the government should address and should be able to overcome in order and really utilize the apparatus in order to strengthen the delivery of ECCE program. So essentially, what we are trying to ask countries is to be able to come up with evidence-based reforms and policies. And what do we mean by this is that making the evidence and data center of their decision making, where there is equitable allocation of resources, there is targeted financing, there is tailored support and interventions that aims to really bridge the gap between what we are expecting from them to deliver vis-a-vis what is being really felt or implemented at the classroom level. So it's really between that huge disconnect that we're trying to bridge. And one way for us to do that is to be able to increase evidence-based education reform and policies. It's a bit long response, but I do hope I was able to somehow address some of your points. And I'll pass over to Dr. Vina, please.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, Sir Alejandro. So, Ibu Helvia, thank you for the question. Very difficult one to answer. I think, yeah, again, I think now I suddenly forget what I need to answer. Yeah, so I think, we mentioned about, how can we measure learning outcomes. So definitely that's an expert learning outcomes. Sir Alejandro has mentioned Sir Alejandro has mentioned very clearly. Mas Lutfi, can you please help me? Yeah. So I think, but perhaps it's just a reminder. I think yes, learning outcome is very important, and I think we need to ensure that, because by measuring learning outcome, we can also ensure to what extent early childhood education has gained its impact. But I think we also need to be careful in ways that we don't want early childhood education to become as too academic. We see this phenomena, what people call as schoolification of early childhood care education, when early childhood education becoming more and more academic, academics. And also we need to understand that learning outcomes, that children's foundational learning, such as literacy, numeracy, is also very much relied on the social emotional development. So I think while we are trying to ensure that we can, have a better learning outcome, we can only do that if we are strengthening the social emotional aspect, because social emotional aspect is really the foundation for children's academic performance. And your question number 2, Ibu, regarding what the donor organization should do. Again, this is a very, very difficult question, but I think at the moment, I think this will require a very long research, a very long discussion. But as I've mentioned in my presentation, very often our relationship with the donor organization is always in terms of the financial aspect. We borrow some money, or they give us some grant, and then a project will be created. I think it's a good way to start, but again, very often it's not sustainable, because once the project is ended, that everything is concluded. So that's why in my presentation, I propose that, we need to shift our relationship with the donor organization from merely the financial relationship, but we need to include them in strengthening the policy aspect. Because when we are strengthening the policy aspect, we are advocating for more rules for the, national government, the local government, and also the central government to play more parts in ensuring that, universal early childcare education can be achieved. But again, this is just, a very, very simple answer that I can give at the moment. I think your question will require some reflection, Ibu, but thank you so much for the question.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Prof. and Sir Alejandro. So hopefully you can answer your question, yeah, Ibu Dr. Helvia. Okay. Okay, so let's move to the next question. We have the question from the chat box from Josefina Melida. Ibu Josefina Melida is asking about here, as AI and digital technology are becoming increasingly common in education, how can early childhood educators use these tools to support learning without diminishing teachers' creativity, children's social interactions, and play-based learning? Okay. Oh, maybe there is something appear here. Maybe for admin, you can help me, Mbak Nisa.
Perhaps the admin, Pak Denny.
Maybe Bapak ya.
Ayo.
Okay. Okay, everything good. Okay.
It's very interesting. The screen appears on the question of the use of
AI.
technology.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, I think it's definitely something that we continue need to navigate. Yeah, I think with the use of technology, definitely, technology is always like, a two-edged of a sword. Yeah, I think it has some benefits, it has some positive contribution, but it also has some negative contribution. And I think, we really need to find ways to navigate the use of technology. One thing for sure is that technology is never a replacement for human. It is there to help the human. It is there to help the teacher. It cannot replace teaching. It cannot replace caring. There are other things that the technology can do. At the moment, for example, teachers in early childhood care education, very often they are struggling with the administrative work. So perhaps technology is there to help them, ease their burden when it comes to the administrative works. Technology, I think, is also very handy as a form of, learning resources. For example, in Indonesia, with the use of the flip television, for example, the teachers can have access to the house of education or rumah pendidikan, where they have, number of resources that the teachers can use. So I think there are ways that technology can give in order to to facilitate learning, but of course some degree of consideration is also needed to ensure that technology is not working alone, then technology is not replacing teacher. And I think again this is something that perhaps require a long discussion.
Okay, yeah, maybe Sir Ali, you want to respond for the question?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Dr. Vina very well answered that one, but I would like to add that if you look at existing discussions right now at the global level in terms of the educational technology more broadly, I mean, looking at AI, but looking at educational technology more broadly, clearly there seems to be an insufficient evidence that proves that educational technology alone, and by extension AI, improves learning. And therefore, that lack of evidence in the discussion puts into question how do we now use technology and AI. So it's not about more of technology or more of AI, right? So it's not about a full consumption of AI implemented or adopted in the classroom, but rather how are we smart enough in utilizing AI as an instrument, as a tool, not to replace pedagogical practice, not to replace academic freedom, but really to use AI as a tool in improving learning. And there are even existing studies that show cases where, in some contexts, AI or even educational technology as a whole disrupts learning and somehow produces negative learning. So that means it somehow makes learning much more difficult for some learners. And therefore, that puts, again, a good critical reflection around how can we put a structure in place that puts AI or educational technology in a proper place where educators, school leaders, policymakers are using them not as the magic wand that simply solves every problem, but rather puts it as a tool, as an instrument to achieve the intended goal, which is eventually foundational learning and really good learning outcomes for our children across the region. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Hopefully, can answer your question, Ibu Yosefina Melida, ya. Okay, we still have the question from the personal chat box here from Nur Syafiqoh Mazlan. So the question is, while many early childhood curricula now advocate a play-based learning, teacher-directed practices remain common. So what strategies can help educators transition toward child-initiated learning, and how can we shift parents' perceptions, particularly in Southeast Asian context, to see play as an important pathway to children's holistic development? So this very interesting question. Okay, please.
Do you want to start first, Sir Alejandro? Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, so again, I think thank you very much for the question. Again, as I've mentioned in my presentation, we need to move beyond individual resilience to the system resilience. So very often when we see the practice of early childhood care education in the region, I agree with you that in some countries, I don't want to generalize, but we are still observing some countries, even in Indonesia, some kindergarten, for example, some center who are still adopting teacher-centered approach rather than child-centered approach. And I completely agree with the person who asked the question that if we would like to implement play-based pedagogy, it has to be child-centered. But at the moment, we are still observing number of center, and also in the region, as far as my limited observation is concerned, we are still seeing, teacher-centered is being implemented. But I don't want to focus on the individual level by saying that the teachers does not understand. Yes, we need to, to work on the teachers' capacity. We need to, develop some capacity building models so that the teachers can have a better pedagogical understanding of how to work with young children. But I think there is also a need to, take care of the system level because in many centers that I visited, for example, it's not that the teacher doesn't want to use child center, but sometimes they are presented with different of obstacle. The teacher-children ratio, for example, is not ideal. We all know, for example, that for the teachers to implement child-centered approach, the ratio between the teachers and the children needs to be very small. The smaller the classroom, the better the teachers to pay attention to the children, and the the greater opportunity for the teachers to implement child-centered, because child-centeredness cannot be implemented, or it's going to be very challenging to be implemented in a classroom full of 50 children, for example, with only one teacher without any assistant teacher. So I don't want to put blame on the teacher, but I think we also need to see at the system level, at the structural level, what kind of problem exists and how do we ensure that the problem can be erased. So again, I think so here we are talking about another issue that goes beyond access, which is the issue of quality. And quality here refers to, for example, because of the limited funding, early childhood care education in many countries in Southeast Asia is not part of universal education, is not part of compulsory education. As the result, it's often relying on the private sectors and also from the community's participation. The government budget remains very limited for early childhood care education. I think almost all countries in Southeast Asia, their budget for early childhood care education is still below 10%, with exception of several countries, very, very little country. So I think when the budget is very limited, it's very difficult for the center who are self-reliant, who are using their own budget to have a good quality early childhood education. So I think we also need to take care of the system level. That's why, and also, for example, the training for the workforce, for the teachers is also very limited. It's often centralized in the center. Teachers in the urban areas, teachers in the rural areas sometimes have difficulties to access capacity building program, training program, professional development program. So a lot of structural issues. So I think that's why in my presentation, when I talk about the key area number 7, which can have better budget, can have a greater budget, and when the government have a greater budget, then probably problems related with the system, with the infrastructure, with the ecosystem can slowly be tackled.
So maybe to sum up what Dr. Vina mentioned, if we are going to ask the international community, clearly the play-based approach is somehow reflected and outlined in the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Child, where the right to play is a legal right for many learners, especially for those children at the early stages of development. And so the international is very clear on that particular commitment of governments and ministries of education across the world, where the right to play should be enshrined in all of our implementation of the education system. And so the question now is, how do we operationalize this commitment at the global level down to the classroom or even at the local level? And therefore, I'd like to echo what Dr. Vina mentioned around the need for localized or contextualization of these pedagogical approach, and how can we address some of the cultural barriers, one of which is the traditional perception where play is perceived to be non-academic, and it's not purposeful learning. We need to challenge that kind of cultural thinking. And so one way to do that is to link play-based approaches or activities towards the learning objectives. So it is really the task of ECE educators, teachers on the ground that should be able to outline and make that linkage more explicit in terms of emphasizing the role of play-based approach and enhancing the broader cognitive development of children, and not only on foundational skills, but also of socio-emotional learning and other non-cognitive development that is critical for learners to acquire before they enter primary education. So it's really about looking at the tools in our disposal as an educator, as a teacher, as a school principal, in order to utilize and leverage, in order to challenge some of these, not only of structural limitations, because we know there are already existing barriers that we have, but the cultural, the social norms that challenges us to use this kind of approach in our respective context. So we have tools within our disposal. Let's leverage that and try to be able to use that in what way we can in order to implement what the global commitment essentially says in the UNHRC right to play for children. Thank you.
Gimana?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the answer. So Again, we have Irdina Zainal. Maybe you can ask directly because she mentions she or he, I think, yeah, she. Please, Irdina Zainal, can you unmute your
Okay, hi.
microphone? Okay, yeah,
Hi. Okay,
please.
so just now I noticed that one of the shifts that is in the pipeline for the future of ECE in Southeast Asia is from readiness to rights. So my question is, we often talk about preparing children to be future ready, especially in today's world where, they use this term VUCA, where it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and also ambiguous. But now at the same time, we are also increasing the emphasis on children's rights and their well-being in the present. So how do we strike that balance between preparing children for the future and also respecting their needs, interests, and rights present? Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead, Sir Alejandro? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miss Irdina. I assume you are from Singapore, am I correct?
Yes, I'm from Singapore.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. So again, it is a very important question, but in my opinion, I don't think we need to, to put the notion of rights and the notion of future ready as two binary opposition. I don't think they are, in contradiction with one another. As I mentioned before, we often see early childcare education as a space to prepare young children to be future ready. But perhaps we need to shift our paradigms that, early childhood education is not only a space to prepare young children for the future, but it is also a space to allow the children to recreate different kind of future. So, a future that is more equity, a future that is perhaps more inclusive, a future that is perhaps more, more respecting the local culture, local practice, and local knowledge. So I think if we shift our paradigm, we are not, because very often, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the justification teachers often use, for example, when they are drilling their children, you're using a lot of academic, exercise to the children, what I call earlier as the schoolification of young children, is because they want the children to be ready at least to. Yeah, and at least in to enroll to primary education, but it's because our understanding of the future is very limited. We only understand, yeah, interesting. Sorry, we only understand the future in relation to the workforce, in relation to the economic growth. And I'm not saying that those are not important. Those are indeed very important, but there are also a lot of issues that perhaps young children needs to address. Yeah, we are seeing from time to time the violation of children's rights all over the globe is also happening. Yeah, I think the children who are in displacement, the children who belong in the refugee minority, for example, and even as I've mentioned before, children who are coming from indigenous background, they often do not have access to high quality early childhood care education. So I think there are a lot of issues in our society. I truly believe that when we are respecting, honoring children's rights, we are respecting children as a citizen, as a full individual. Because when we talk about children's rights, if we look at to the United Nations Convention of Children's Rights, there are two pillars of children's rights: the pillars of protection and also the pillars of participation. At the moment, we are focusing so much on the pillars of protection, but we forget that young children, they also have capacity, they also have voices, they also have agency that needs to be treated. And if we give that space to flourish, we allow the space for young children to have their own agency, I think we will, then we are going to have a different kind of citizen, and perhaps a better one, yeah, that in a way will also help us to reach happening in front of our eyes, the polarization in the society, the inequities that continue to strike, the climate crisis. It's all very gloomy. But perhaps if we can focus on the notion of children's right, and when I said that we are focusing on the notion of children's right, it doesn't mean that we take away the foundation, the importance of foundational learning. Then early childhood education, as I mentioned before, can really become a space to help us reimagine a different future, and hopefully that future is a better future, a more inclusive one, and a more justice one. This is a very difficult and important question, Ms. Dina. Maybe we need to have a more detailed discussion after this webinar to have a more detailed conversation.
And perhaps just to add my 2 cents on what Dr. Vina mentioned around the potential contradiction between the future and the rights or children's rights or rights-based approach on ECCE. I'd like to frame the conversation on the idea of polycrisis, where the region or the Southeast Asia is experiencing huge shifts in fundamental levels, in different levels, in demographic, climate, socioeconomic, and many other critical areas of the region's development. And within the framing of polycrisis, one way to counter the polycrisis is to build resilience in all levels of governance, from the policy, classroom, down to the school and individual level, even to the local communities. And so one way perhaps to address the tension between the two, although as mentioned by Dr. Vina, it's counterproductive to think of them as binary concepts, but I'd like to think of these as having tensions together. And one way to reconcile them, I guess, is really to build system resilience at all levels. And when we say resilience, we're looking at going back to the fundamentals, right? So translating this into policy language, that means sustainable financing, equitable resource allocation, going back to respecting children's rights through looking at pedagogies that will not harm children, and using technology as a means and as an instrument rather than an end in itself. And so we already have this operationalization in some way on how do we build system, school and system resilience. But something that is quite missing in these conversations is that we need to be able to unpack the kind of education system that us as educators would want to envision, because clearly we are in an unprecedented time, times of constant disruptions and continued disturbances in many other factors. And so the idea of resilience is to be able to consider this challenge, but also at the same time, try to overcome them by leveraging the different tools that we have in our surrounding. And clearly, from a vantage point of policy, which my language is coming into, there are huge policy frameworks and tools that we have in our disposal in order to address that. So that should be able to capacitate governments, ministries, and many other stakeholders in order to address this front and center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer for Prof. Vina and also Sir Alejandro. So unfortunately, that actually we still have several questions, but that I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. So thank you again for our active participants, all participants, and also the speakers. And then, okay, before we officially close today's session, we would like now to proceed with the certificate presentation. So we would like to express our sincere appreciation to our speakers for sharing your time, expertise, and also valuable perspective with us today. So for the IT team, you can help me to present the certificate. Okay. We're still waiting for that. Um, Okay. Okay, so this is the first certificate presentation for Mr. Alejandro Senen Ibanez. So thank you very much for joining us today and giving all the very important topics today. And then the second one, we would like to present the certificate to Professor Vina Adriani, PhD. Thank you very much, Prof, for your time. Okay, and then I think that's all. Oh, okay, for me. Okay, thank you very much as the moderator for today's session. Yeah, I would also like to thank the organizers for the certificate of the appreciation. So thank you very much. Okay. Okay. This is finally participants. This is link here, feedback form, and also the e-certificate link. So participants are kindly reminded to complete the evaluation form. The evaluation form is required to who is to receive a certificate of participation. And then thank you for the ID team. Okay. Yeah, and before we close, we would like to invite everyone to join us for one final group photo again. Okay, we kindly ask all participants to turn on your camera if possible and join us for the photo. Okay, Mbak Nisa, can you help me to capture this moment? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, again with C sign, please. Okay, everyone, please. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, for another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay. All right, everyone, please. Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Sir Alejandro. Thank you, Bu
Yeah, thank
Sufi.
you.
Thank you,
Very much.
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Makasih, Bu Bapak semua, ya.
Yeah.
Baik.
Okay, thank you very much for the speaker. Yeah. And with that, we have come to the end of today's session. On behalf of Xiaomi CSEP, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Alejandro, and also Professor Vina, for sharing your insights and perspective with us today. And then I would also like to thank to all of you, our participants, colleagues, partners, educators, researchers, practitioners, and friends of Xiaomi CSEP for joining us and being part of this important conversation. And today's discussion reminds us that from all the webinar series we have joined, the future of early childhood is not something we simply wait for. It is something that we shape through the decision we make, the policies we develop, and the practice we strengthen, and the partnership we build today. As this marks the final session of the Xiaomi CSEP 9th Anniversary Webinar Series, we would also like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank to all of you for joining us and staying with us throughout this journey. And from the very beginning until today, and your continued participation and support have truly made this anniversary series special. And then by that, thank you once again for being part of the Xiaomi CSEP 9th Anniversary Webinar Series. We hope that today's conversation will continue beyond this webinar and inspire further collaboration and action for the future of early childhood in Southeast Asia. I am Muhammad Lutfia Siddiqui, and it has been my pleasure to serve as your moderator and master of ceremonies today. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.